So, Dave, what have you got to show us today?
Well, I could show you me having a nice cup of tea if you like.
Well, that's the most important
which
thing.
Which is quite an important occurrence. But there was something I wanted to show you, which is over here. Come see this. Oh. We could take the scenic route. Should we take the scenic route? Because on the scenic route we can, on our way down, we can have a little quick catch up on the potatoes, which you remember we planted a few weeks ago. These are the first earlies. They're up. Look, they're going strong. Very happy. And the ones that we actually filmed. Do you remember we were cutting some to see how they progressed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This was the line that we cut. They're up. They're all up. Look, they're all coming up. Just as a little aside, we piled up the turf over there. And the other day I lifted a piece up and there's some beautiful slow worms under there. You could maybe even find one now, I don't know. So they'll really help us with that. Lovely slow worms just hiding under the slabs of turf we took up. Anyway, to the thing I want to show you. Oh, I've got the ball, I forgot that. I forgot I've got the ball, go on. On our way down, we're also going to pass our other potato plot, which is main crop potatoes, which we only put in last week. So these aren't up yet. And there's a few Jerusalem artichokes under the ground there, which we planted, if we get desperate. Where's the ball? Where is it? Well, I haven't got it. Anyway, come on. So, over here, what we really want to look at is a very interesting rhododendron. So, this particular rhododendron is interesting because if you actually have a look at the trunk of this, it's absolutely hollowed out, empty.
But it's huge.
It's huge. So, the girth of this, when this property was sold in 1863, I strongly suspect that was the buyer, the new owner, who planted all the rhododendron gardens in here. So if he did that, say, within 10 years of taking over, let's say 1870, that would make this tree 150 years old or thereabout. And it's absolutely hollowed out in the middle. You could put your hand in there, but it's still alive. And that's interesting because it really shows how hardy and virile certain rhododendrons are. And that leads us into the subject of Rhododendron ponticum, which has turned out to be a bit of a scourge now of estates like this because it's so virile, it's so potent, it has a great tendency to self-seed, it has a great tendency to, if the branches fall over and hit the ground, they'll root, and it also puts out a chemical into the surrounding soil that stops other things germinating. So,
apart from nettles.
Nettles seem to survive, don't they? On an estate like this, originally, something like this. These were brought into into England in 1763, I think. Originally, the ponticum, because they were so strong, they came over from Armenia and around Turkish area, and they were used. One of the uses they planted them for in estates like this was cover for pheasant. It provided great cover for pheasants, but also they were very strong, so they used them to breed and hybridize with more sensitive new varieties they were bringing in from America, which were being sent over by plant hunters from over there, because they're so virile, the ponticum, that you might find a very beautiful new variety species coming over from America, which wouldn't survive here necessarily. But if they hybridized it with this stuff, the ponticums, which you can see they have single flowers, very simple single flowers, it would work. So they were planted all over the estates, and it wasn't a problem until I think after the First and Second World War, when the estates didn't have the manpower to keep everything clean and tidy, and they started taking over. And they've actually, in Scotland, they've taken over whole hillsides where they've escaped, and they've become a real problem.
So should we have a look at some of the other plants?
The other rhododendrons we have here, this isn't the rhododendron garden. We actually have a rhododendron garden that was planted, which was absolutely superb in its day. Part of that initial planting that was done around 150, 170 years ago produced this beauty here. Look at this. That really is in some top of its bloom schedule. Look at it. I mean, breathtaking is a word that gets thrown around and used carelessly, but I remember the first time I saw this, it took my breath away. It is a breathtaking specimen, and that is 120, 150 years old, and it's probably never really been cut down or pruned, and that's what you get.
And
amazing.
We've had a volunteer, Teppo, who's been pruning around here,
Yeah.
so that we've able to sort out other ones. So
Yeah, I mean, some of these similar kind of age, but they've been cut back now, and the wood stacked up. Just the piles of it, the way Teppo's piled it. It's like an art piece, isn't it?
So this is where Teppo's been doing quite a lot of taming,
Yeah.
because all of these were really so large they were going to be blown over by winds.
Yes.
And here we've just got this one stump.
That's a white one. So, I mean, I'm not a definitive expert on rhododendrons at all, but I did read that a lot of the white ones we had, that's a kind of whitey pink one, came from some that were introduced from the Himalayas and Nepal area. So these were introduced around the mid-1800s when we were beginning to go out into those areas. And a lot of the white variety came from a variety called Rhododendron hookeri, and that was named after one of the famous plant explorers of the time, who was going off into Nepal and having all these adventures and being chased for his troubles as well, because they didn't want these as plant explorers poking around in their rural areas, and they had some amazing adventures to capture and collect some of these varieties.
So let's go and see the result of that.
You're hinting at the real rhododendron garden. What we're looking at here is just odd ones that have been planted to enhance the entrance. They actually planted a formal rhododendron garden just over there. We'll go and look at that. It's astonishing because it looked like Hyde Park. It was that manicured, formal paths for you to walk round. And when we go over there and have a look now, you'll see what nature can do when it reclaims its territory. Just on our way down to the actual original formal rhododendron gardens, which are no longer formal, we'll have a quick look at this. This was a little area that was planted in the 1980s, and it contains a real mixture of both azaleas and rhododendrons. And these are the result of 100 years breeding and hybridizing. So these are not the original species varieties, which we may have in other parts of the garden. These are the offspring of many years of breeding. And the value of these in the garden is that you get a huge flowering period because there's so many different varieties. So you describe it yourself, David, as like a firework display, I believe. And it's just going over now. Some of them are just going over, the azaleas are going over. So you don't get the full effect. But a couple of weeks ago, it really, wow, it hit you when you walk down here. Maybe not to everybody's taste, but certainly impressive. Look at that. That's an amazing one, isn't it? It's like a pair of French frilly knickers.
Got two balls in her mouth now.
She has. She's still. Lillian will not. She's not interested in this big green one. She only likes a little green tennis ball. Mabel knows that, so she takes it and hides it in her mouth, and then picks up her own green one. So Lillian's looking around, going, "Where's my ball?" She knows where it is. Here it is, isn't it?
Tail wagging.
You know. You're very naughty sometimes, aren't you, you little monster?
Right, let's go and have a look at the rhododendrons.
Okay. So, it's very hard to imagine what was here 150 years ago, but I have seen the photograph. And as we look down onto that bank on the other side, it was intertwined with formal paths which had gravel and proper borders. It looked like Hyde Park or somewhere like that, where the owner of the house, I'm sure, at this time of year, he would have been hosting parties at the weekends, bringing his friends down from London and saying, "Look at this," because the whole thing about collecting these rhododendrons, it was a status issue. It was one-upmanship. They were all after the new variety that nobody else had got, and then they'd bring their friends around, bring them out with a drink, I guess, and say, "Look at that." And it really was a world, the breeding and the selling and the cultivation, it is a world based in status and one-upmanship, where they were all trying to get one over on each other. And the results were fantastic. They invested huge amounts of money in putting these kind of landscapes together. And I often wonder, it's not the best of thoughts, but if we brought those people back here now, I think they'd weep. The sadness. It's an economic situation. These were built at a time where manual labour was underpriced. They could probably afford to have, I don't know, 30 people or whatever working here, looking after everything. And of course, after the two world wars, all that changed, which explains the degradation of them. People just could not and cannot even these days afford to maintain areas like this. So if we go through here,
Well, we're very appreciative of volunteers like you and Teppo, who comes during the winter.
yeah. Yes. But it's kind of beautiful in a way. It's kind of melancholy. There's a sense of melancholy about it. It's like the lost garden. But also at the same time, when you study the Victorian gardening world and techniques, it was an epoch, an absolute epoch. And in terms of skill and knowledge and technique. But that was brought about by the financial ability to pay people to advance themselves and become experts in this. And this now, I mean, it's still beautiful. It's beautiful in a different way. In those days, it was all about formality and look how we've tamed the environment, look what we've done. Now, there's a beautiful naturalistic feel to it that makes you think you could almost be in the Himalayas, which brings us on to another interesting little thing, which is tea. One of the guys who went out plant hunting was a guy named Robert Fortune, and there's actually rhododendrons named after this guy, Rhododendron fortunei. This guy has been accused of the greatest act of industrial espionage in the world ever. And the subject of his espionage was tea. And we actually here have planted a few tea plants to see what would happen. Theoretically, they should be okay in this environment, similar to the Himalayas, cool, fresh air, hillside. And Robert Fortune was the guy who brought tea. He stole it from China and took it to India to grow it in those areas where we had control, the British had control. So it's rather appropriate historically that in a setting like this, we try a few of his tea plants to see what happens with those. And I think we've got some up here, David, haven't we? Robert Fortune. If you read his story, the Chinese did not want him in China. This was around, we had all the problem with the Opium Wars and when they didn't want to trade with us because we had nothing of value to them. And he used to slip into China, kind of illegally, out of the area where they were allowed to be, the ports, and go off into the countryside collecting plants like this. And they tried to kill him. I mean, they absolutely tried to kill him. There were people hunting him down, and he really had to, it was like special operations in the Second World War, this guy. But he managed to get the tea and take it to India, and he established the tea industry in India, much to the chagrin of the Chinese. So let's see if we can find one of these tea plants that we've got going on down here. Ah, there's one. I can see one. I also have a ball. Really? Oh, we've got a few here, look. See that? Oh, she's been in the river, look. Look at that. Look at that. She looks like a dirty sheep now, doesn't she? So here we have one. Yeah, I think we'll get down here tomorrow and give this a bit of loving care and attention. Planted last year, was it, David?
Actually, in the winter.
In the winter, yeah. I mean, the soil's nice. It probably just needs, you know, we could give it a little feed and some more water. Take a bit care. There's a few little problems on it, which look like mineral deficiencies to me. Yeah. I mean, it's its first year. It's its first year, and you know, people don't appreciate with shrubs, and they behave very differently in their first and second year to how they will through the rest of their life. And people put them in the ground and think, go on, off you go, and sometimes they do. But those first 2 years, it's the same with a rose. You've really got to mollycoddle them, and if you do, they'll be fine. They're like children. If you look after them when they're small, they'll be fine. You can let them go. But those first couple of years, you really got to remember to take care of them, keep them watered, keep them protected, and then they'll be fine. This one has been left to his own devices a little bit. In the long term, it will send his roots down. But the point is that the root system, the fibrous root system on a 1-year-old plant, is probably not developed enough to sustain it without your help. And this is why people buy things from garden centres or wherever, take them home, plant them in the ground, and they die. And people think, oh, I'm a bad gardener. It's not. It's just that the plant was young. You had to look after it a little bit at the beginning. There we go.
So let's have a look at some of these plants, and Teppo's labelling them,
Yep.
and we've got the Argentinians mapping. So behind us, we've got something quite amazing.
I mean, this is plant archaeology, isn't it? Really, because we don't know. Let's go back to our supposition that this was planted sometime after 1863. Well, that was just the time where people like Robert Fortune were going off, and Hooker, he was another one, going off into Nepal and these kind of areas and bringing in new varieties new species that we hadn't seen before. And then they were breeding them, hybridizing them, and coming up with new things. And these are probably, I would guess, the result of that kind of process of new species coming in, being hybridized and bred. Unfortunately, we don't know the provenance of these. We have no idea what they are. I mean, look at that. That's beautiful. So the first thing is to sort out what's what and put labels on which plant is which and map them out, which is what we're in the process of doing at the moment. And some of them could have disappeared. They may not be in cultivation anymore.
And there are others that look like ponticum.
Absolutely.
And might well not be.
Yes, I mean, something like this, ponticum always had a single flower like that. But it could be, it's a couple of things. It could be a hybrid of ponticum and something else. Or it could have been, again, I'm not an expert on rhododendrons. I don't know whether they were putting them onto rootstocks of ponticum to give them more virility. And what has happened is the ponticum has taken over and the beautiful speciality has disappeared, so you get left with ponticum growing up from the bottom.
which is why we have to label, map, and then extract.
Yeah.
So let's come and have a look at some of the others. Look at that amazing red flower at the top there.
Yeah. But no, look at the flower, David. Look at that. That has a black throat on it. Now that is something that's been bred, I'm sure. And it's old. So this is an example of one of... You can imagine a plant breeder getting a new species coming in from somewhere and saying, right, now how can I make money out of this?
I think we've got a photograph taken from here with the junction of the paths. So there's one path.
I mean, here now, this looks like a dirty old cart track. In the photograph that we have, there are border edges and beautiful gravel, spotless. And now we're back down to this.
Now there's another red one there. So this was a pair of red ones.
That is different. This one has this beautiful throat. It's like claret, isn't it? It's like wine. You see, they would have spent hours looking at these, David, and going, oh, look at the difference between the flower form, the throating on that. That looks almost like an orchid in there. And so for the Victorians, this is what it was all about, finding the little difference between this one and this one, which gave you that one-upmanship on your neighbour. And the plant breeders, the nurserymen made a lot of money. You know, if you knew how to breed these things and hybridise them.
And this is much pinker than than Ponticum.
Yes, definitely. You only get that pink. I've only ever seen that in the winter crocus. The unusual colour there.
And look, there's white and pink over there, and white with black over here.
Yeah, I think this is the white one that I saw near the gate as well. And as I said earlier, I read, I'm not an expert on this, but a lot of the white varieties derive from a species that came in from the Himalayas called Hookeri. They named it Hookeri. So that could be, the timeline fits about right. That could have been bred off that. This is interesting because growing from the bottom here, we have a pure white variety. Look at that, pure white. And then on the same tree, we have this one, which is like a, how would you describe that? A shell, it's not a shell pink, I don't know. It's like candy floss almost. So that tells me, not definitively, but there may be, this might be the original kind of rootstock that they hybridised the plant from to create this. So this is the reversion, it's reverting from the bottom back to one of the parents. But just that one, white one, coming out from there, could well give us some indication of the parentage of that. So these are hybrids that they've planted. You know, the connoisseurs would have spent hours musing over the difference between these flowers, the slight shade, you know, shade variations, the flower form. Same with any kind of collecting, you know, you become almost a maniac about it.
Very delicate, this one.
Yeah.
That's a deep colour, isn't it?
Yeah.
And look over there, that one is a more orange form of pink.
Now you see, this is what the Victorians were doing. They go, look, you've got two pinks there, almost the same colour, but look at the shape of that. That is slightly more pointed. I want one of those.
And it's so coloured that it's actually just saturating the colour sensors of the camera.
It's almost fluorescent, isn't it?
It is almost fluorescent, yes.
Yeah. Oh, and you've been in the river as well.
Dear, dear.
Whoever planted this was going for, it was a collection. This is a collection.
Oh, look, we've got over there another one of these with the dark centres.
Yeah.
Now, there used to be something that was almost an orange somewhere around here, and we'll just have to wait for it to grow. But look, you see all of this that's been cut to reveal the paths, it will all grow beautifully.
Yeah. And the thing is, now you're getting on top of this, it's easier to maintain. When it reaches that impenetrable stage, all bets are off really, aren't they? You can't keep on top.
So this is the path that we've now opened up, and we've still got to...
And you can see from the piles of wood, cut wood, how much work Teppo's done. Oh, look, it's tagged one there.
So each one of these has been tagged so that we can
Does that
put
mean
it on
he's
a map.
identified it, David? Or?
No, it just means that it's tagged so that it can be put onto a map.
Right, 149.
Now we just count the labels. We have 150 labels, but between the one and another plants there are another one which are not labeled. So by now we just have the one with the label, but in the future we are going to also take a picture of all those plants that does have a label, and also the one that doesn't have, in order to do a complete map. And the next time we finish with the numbers, we are gonna
Photograph
take
the plants?
pictures, because the flowers are already there.
So Franco, what are you doing here?
I'm doing the map of plants that we was surveying. We have 2 maps of the plants and the numbers each plant.
Look at that one, Dave. I'm becoming a rhododendron addict.
That's really quite special, isn't it?
Well, if you were a collector, you'd think it was very special. Well, David, I need to get back because I've got some duties to perform for the lunch.
We all do.
Um,
Look, the dogs are in the
that's where they're
stream
getting
again.
so... You! Look! Oh! Oi! Stop it!